So let's begin. I am so pleased that Chaucer is hosting tonight's event. As many of you know, from Santa Barbara to Santa Fe and beyond, Marcia Meier is well connected in the writing universe and has supported, coached, edited, and encouraged many people, myself included. That's why it's so great to see so many familiar names out there return to love tonight when she talks about her memoir, Face. To give Marcia a proper introduction and to moderate this evening, I am pleased to introduce poet Lisa Rizzo. Lisa Rizzo is the author of Always a Blue House by Saddle Road Press, a finalist in the 2016 National Federation of Press Women Awards, and in the poem On Ocean from Big Table Publishing. Her poetry and nonfiction have appeared in several journeys and anthologies, and soon enough, we will get to see her memoir in progress, Half Orphan, a Daughter and Her Father. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. Welcome. Thanks. Glad to be here. Glad to be here. So it's my pleasure to introduce my good friend, Marcia Meier, who's going to be reading tonight. Marcia is an award-winning writer, writing coach, and developmental book editor. In addition to this wonderful book we're going to hear from tonight, Face, her other books include Unmasked, Women Write About Sex and Intimacy After 50, Ireland, Place Out of Time, and Heart on a Fence, all of those from Weeping Willow Books, as well as Navigating the Rough Waters of Today's Publishing World, Critical Advice for Writers from Industry Insiders from Quill Driver Books, and Santa Barbara, Paradise on the Pacific from Longstreet Press. A newspaper journalist for nearly 20 years, she has freelanced or written for numerous publications, including the Los Angeles Times, the Seattle Times, the Arizona Republic, the Writer Magazine, Santa Barbara Magazine, the Huffington Post, and Thrive Global. She holds a bachelor's degree in journalism and an MFA in creative writing, and has taught writing at the collegiate level and in private workshops for more than 20 years. So Marcia, welcome, and we are so happy to be able to hear from you tonight.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That was a lovely introduction, Lisa. Thank you so much for being here and doing this for me. And thanks to Mike and also Mari Curley, the owner of Chaucer's Books, my beloved hometown bookstore for the 35 years I lived in Santa Barbara. So I'm really, really thrilled and delighted to be here tonight. And I wanted to mention, because the book cover was up for a bit, and I don't know if I probably don't mention this very often, but that actually is a photo of my face when I was 5. And it was taken, I'm guessing probably within a week or two before the accident that I was in. And then Don Mitchell, who is the designer of the book, thank you for showing that again, came up with the idea to use the language from the surgeon's notes over the image. So it's pretty striking. And
Very powerful.
yeah, and Don and his partner Ruth Thompson, who's the publisher of Saddle Road Press, I'm so grateful to them. I have to thank them both for putting out such a beautiful book and working with me for many years on this. So anyway, thank you very much. I'm going to start out this evening by reading the first chapter, and then it's probably going to take about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll do some Q&A. Okay.
Just remind everyone, there is at the bottom of your screen, there's a little, it says Q&A. So if you have questions for Marcia, please type those in, and she can answer some of them, or hopefully all of them, after she reads.
Yay. Okay. So here we go. This is the first chapter, June 17th, 1961. A red bike. I had a brand new bike, cherry red with chrome fenders, my first two-wheeler. Did my dad teach me to ride it? Did he run along beside me as I pedaled, holding the back of the seat until I found my balance, tipping from one side to the other, then finally discovering that middle place where you know you'll never fear tipping again? I don't remember, But I know it was a Saturday, the first day of summer vacation, because after breakfast, my older sister went around the corner to her friend's house instead of to school. The heat and humidity of a Michigan summer already gripped the day. As I went out to the garage to get my bike, I could feel my blue t-shirt grow damp and cling to my back and stomach. When summer takes hold in Michigan, moisture settles near the ground, sucking everything down with it. By late afternoon, people would be sitting immobile behind screened porches, praying for the whisper of a breeze. Mom had shooed my brother and older sister and me out after breakfast. We lived in downtown Muskegon, where neighborhoods were arranged in blocks of small clapboard or brick-faced houses with alleys that bisected each block. The narrow streets were lined with tall maples and oaks, which scattered acorns and, when the temperatures dipped, dropped leaves like graceful magenta and citrine flags, signaling the coming winter. Our neighborhood was filled with kids, and it was never long before a dozen or more would gather. Soon there'd be a game, hide and seek, hopscotch, tag, it didn't matter. We'd play for hours, coming home only for meals. Adults didn't worry. My new bike had a white basket on the front handlebars and red streamers that fell from the hand grips. I had finally mastered riding on my own and was anxious to show off for my friend, Annie, who lived across the street. But on the way, I ran into Mrs. Medema, who was sweeping the sidewalk in front of her apartment building next door. "What a beautiful bike, Marcia," she said, "and a two-wheeler. I noticed your dad was helping you balance on it. When did you take off the training wheels?" "Yesterday," I said, and smiled proudly. "I can ride all by myself now." "Well, that calls for a celebration. Want to come up for some cookies and tea?" I liked Mrs. Medema. A widow, she often babysat for us. She always wore a dress under an apron, stockings, and thick black shoes. Her gray hair was cut short and curled. 3 other widows lived in the brick building, but only Mrs. Medema paid any mind to us kids. She lived on the 2nd floor, and her apartment was cozy and bright with sunshine. I parked my bike on the sidewalk in front of her steps and carefully set the kickstand. Then I walked up the narrow stairs with her, holding her hand. The smell of freshly baked peanut butter cookies filled the apartment. My mouth watered as she took a blue and white ceramic plate from the cupboard and put 4 warm cookies on it, 2 for me and 2 for her. She reached for her blue bone china teapot above the stove, poured hot water from the kettle into it, and filled a silver tea cylinder with loose Earl Grey leaves. "We'll let it steep for just a minute," she said. "Let's go sit at the table." She carried the teapot and the plate of cookies over to a small table near the window, then turned back to get 2 cups and saucers that matched the cookie plate. She placed 1 cloth napkin beside each cup and poured the tea. "Is your mom busy this morning?" she asked. "I think so," I said, lisping. I had lost my 2 front teeth just a few weeks earlier. "Molly is crawling all over the place, and Chucky keeps trying to steal my toys." She laughed. "Your dad at work?" I nodded and bit into one of the cookies. My dad, my grandfather, and 2 of my uncles owned Meier Cleaners. Dad worked every day but Sunday, when we walked 4 blocks to St. Joseph's for Mass and saw my grandparents and most of my aunts and uncles and cousins. After Masses, the families lingered in front of the stone-faced church, catching up on the week and exchanging the latest gossip. The priest, Father Stratz, wandered through the crowd in his colorful vestments. I didn't like Father Stratz. Short and squat, he had a full head of gray hair, a thick German accent, and though he nodded and smiled at the adults, he scowled at the kids. A slight breeze came through Mrs. Medema's screen as I bit into a cookie. I could see my friend's house across the street, and then I saw her in the front yard. I took a sip of the tea and ate the second cookie quickly. "Thanks, Mrs. Medema," I said through the gap in my teeth. "I have to go now." I ran down the stairs, grabbed the handlebars of my bike, and pushed up the kickstand with my toe. At the corner, I carefully looked for cars before crossing. I started into the intersection where there was a 4-way stop. A man and woman in a tan sedan had stopped at the corner. I was halfway across the street when the car began to drive forward. I was so startled I stopped and watched. I didn't understand why he kept coming. I hunched my shoulders and turned my body to fend off the blow. Roscoe and Muriel Ben were driving down 4th Street in a rush. Maybe they were distracted. Maybe their children and grandchildren were coming for that evening to celebrate their grandson's birthday, and Muriel was anxious to get home to clean and prepare. As they approached the stop sign at 4th and Mason, perhaps Muriel was fussing. "Can you go a little faster, Roscoe? I still have to make the cake and get the roast ready to go into the oven. You'll have to help with the potatoes, this darn arthritis. I can't work the peeler anymore." Roscoe pulled to a halt at the stop sign and then drove through the intersection. There was a strange scraping sound. People on the sidewalk were yelling at them. What were they saying? Muriel rolled down the window. "Stop," they were screaming, "stop." Roscoe braked and the car came to a halt about halfway down the block. People were running toward them, surrounding the car. Muriel didn't understand what had happened. "You've hit a child," they yelled. As Muriel and Roscoe approached the stop sign, my 10-year-old sister Sherry was walking home from her friend's house. Just as she turned the corner toward our house, she noticed a car driving slowly and heard a distinct scraping noise, as if something were being dragged underneath. People on the sidewalk started to scream, "Stop, stop." As she watched, Sherry realized my new bike was trapped under the car. When the sedan stopped, it was nearly in front of our house. I had been dragged, caught with the bike under the car, nearly 200 feet. Sherry ran to the front of the car and looked underneath. I was lying on the street under the driver's side. The bike was stuck under the carriage. I was still holding the handlebars. The left side of my face was gone. Sherry ran into our house. Mom was in the front hallway talking on the phone with my grandmother, Mimi. "Marcia's been hit by a car," Sherry screamed. Mom dropped the phone and ran out to the street. My sister picked up the phone and shouted, "Marcia's been hit by a car and she's dead." She hung up the phone and ran after Mom. Mom's morning had begun early. Dad was gone by 6:30. Mom woke 3-year-old Chucky and baby Molly. She helped Chucky get dressed and brush his teeth. She got a bottle for Molly and cereal for Chuck. With 4 children and 2 adults in the house, Dad often said our cramped kitchen seemed like Grand Central Station. A large chrome table with a yellow marbled linoleum top crowded one corner, surrounded by 5 chrome chairs with padded yellow vinyl seats and a high chair. The cupboards were dark, the appliances spare. A small window above the sink, decorated by a frilly white lace curtain, looked out onto the side yard. Once we were all fed, Mom would send us out to play and clean up the kitchen. She was petite, though pudgy around the middle with the remnants of 6 pregnancies. Her dark brown hair was clipped short and styled, and her deep brown eyes were accented with thick, dark brows. Mom put Molly down for a morning nap and started some laundry in the basement. The telephone rang. It was my grandma, Mimi, calling to check in, as she did every day. They fell into an easy conversation. Suddenly, Mom heard people screaming outside. She was about to tell my grandmother to hold on when Sherry burst through the front door. "Mom, Marcia's been hit by a car." She dropped the phone and ran to the street. As she drew near the car, she saw the blood. She saw my bicycle. She felt her chest tighten and thought, "Not again, not another one. Dear Lord, don't let it happen again." By mid-morning, Dad had made his rounds of the dry cleaning plant and stores and was pressing pants in the back room where one of his workers, Carl, was operating the dry cleaning machines. Hot pipes and machinery hissed and moaned. Dad was wearing shirt sleeves, but Carl was wearing a tank top already wet with perspiration. It was insufferably hot, despite the big fans droning and blowing stagnant air from above. The smell of cleaning solvents permeated the plant. When the phone rang, it was Judith, a longtime employee, who brought Dad the news. "Bob, there's been an accident," she said. "It's Marcia. Go to Mercy. They're taking her there." He dropped the pressed trousers and rushed through the plant, ducking automatically under the pipes and conveyor racks that hung low from the ceiling. His Ford station wagon was parked in the back alley. On the way to the hospital, all he could think was, "Please God, not another baby, not Marcia." What is a face? eyes, nose, mouth, cheeks, chin, forehead, an invitation or a warning, a reflection or a misrepresentation. The still surface of a deep pool or a raging creek. Does a face really say anything about a person? Does it say everything? If a face is destroyed, does a person change? If you create a new face, do you create a new life? When Mom got out to the street, the car had been backed away. Someone had lifted the mangled bike off of me and laid it aside. Mom cradled my bleeding head until the ambulance arrived. A neighbor took Sherry and Chuck inside to comfort them and check on Molly. After the ambulance left, Mrs. Medema took her garden hose and washed the blood from the street. I have tried to imagine my mom in those hours, drenched in my blood, holding vigil with my dad, reeling from the possibility she might lose another child to an unspeakable tragedy. When our family physician, Dr. William Bond, saw me in the emergency room, he doubted I'd survive. My cheek was scraped off down to the bone. My left eyelid was missing and the bottom lid was carved away from the eyeball, though the eyeball was intact. There were deep cuts and scrapes on the rest of my face and upper chest. I had lost a lot of blood. Emergency room doctors worked feverishly to stem the bleeding. They inserted intravenous lines into my arms as they tried to keep my heart rate and breathing stable enough to take me into surgery. One of the 3 doctors who worked on me was a 39-year-old plastic surgeon who happened to be at Mercy Hospital when I was brought in. Dr. Bond asked him to see me as a personal favor. Dr. Richard Kisloff was a brilliant surgeon who immigrated to the United States from Germany. He was best known for reattaching severed limbs, a particularly handy skill in Western Michigan where automotive factory injuries were common. Dr. Kisloff and the other doctors worked for hours, pulling skin together to fill the vast hole that had been my left cheek. They formed a bridge of skin to cover my left eye, sutured the wounds on my chest, and bandaged my head. They kept me alive. There is a place you can go, a dream state where it is easy to imagine that whatever your 5 senses may be telling you, whatever sounds of oxygen tanks or rustling uniforms, whatever piercings of your skin or peeling of gauze from your torn face, whatever smells of alcohol or ether, they are not real. The only true thing in that liquid place is the comfort of the warm encirclement of your dad's arms, the familiar drone of the box fan in the window down the hall, the slight breeze and the sticky heat, your mom's voice reassuring and deeply resonant. All reality fades into that place and holds you suspended and safe. Was that deep water suspension induced? Or did the mind take over, protecting by obfuscating, by creating a separate reality? How long did I lie there blissfully unconscious? Days, weeks, it could have been a heartbeat. But when I awoke, all that amniotic protection evaporated in the harsh whiteness of a hospital room. I didn't know where I was. My head and eyes were wrapped in bandages, my hands tied to the sides of the bed. I did not feel any pain, but my head was heavy and I felt woozy. People around me smelled of antiseptic and starched clothing. I was afraid. I heard my mom's voice. She said, "We told you never to cross the street without looking." But I did. I looked both ways. So that's the first chapter. And then the book goes on to talk about what happened after that, where I had underwent 20 surgeries over the next 15 years. And it's an interesting structure. I'll talk a little bit about it, but it's essentially a braided structure. The almost all the chapters begin with the notes from the surgeon's surgery, from one of the surgeries, and then a memory of mine from being in the hospital. And then each chapter moves forward in time. And then it jumps to when I'm in my 50s and realizing that I have to go back in time and find out what that all meant, because I stuffed it all down for about 30 years. So anyway, that's kind of the story. Love to answer some questions if anyone has any.
Okay, well, we do have, well, first of all, we have a comment from Andromeda.
Ah,
Great reading. Thank you very much. So that's wonderful.
thanks, Andromeda.
We do have a question from Shauna, who asks, it's a two-part question. How was the process of writing this for you? And did any ideas about your story change while writing?
Oh, yeah, those are great questions. The process was long. It took me 15 years to write this book. And I spent the first 5 years trying to get some purchase on the book. I had written a first draft of the first chapter, pieces of other chapters. None of it seemed to be coming together very well. And I was also in therapy at the time. I decided to go into therapy because I was dealing with a lot of questions about what had happened to me. And after 5 years, when I wasn't really feeling like I was making any progress, I decided to do an MFA program at Antioch University in Los Angeles. Andromeda was one of my classmates. And I did it for two reasons. One was I wanted some accountability because I've always been really good at making deadlines, and I figured that'd give me a good deadline to complete a first draft, at least, of the book. And I also figured it would be good, to be able to teach later. So, and in fact, the first thing worked out really well. It definitely made me accountable. I ended up with a first draft of the book after my 2-year program, and it was hard. It was really hard for me to write this, and it was really hard to come to terms with a lot of the things that I discovered in the process of writing, in the process of going through and looking at all of the stuff. I should mention, and I'll get to your other question about what was the other question?
The question was, did any ideas about your story change?
Oh, yes,
Right.
and absolutely, and partially because of all the things I discovered in the writing of it. I discovered a lot of things about my mother that I didn't know. My mom was still alive when I started reading this book, but she just didn't want to talk about it. She wouldn't go there with me when I brought it up with her. She was reluctant to engage with me. So I had to figure out a lot of this stuff on my own. And my sister, of course, my older sister was really helpful for me because she was there. And the story of, and I mentioned this last week too, the question of what part of the intersection I was in was at issue for me. The description that I have of myself going over to my friend's house and being hit that way is based on what my mother told me, my mom and dad, what I grew up believing. But I believe now that I was actually coming from the other side of the street because I would have been hit from the right side in that case. And I've always felt protective of this side of my body. So I believe that I was probably coming back from my friend's house, but I honored my mom's recollection in the telling of it in the first chapter. And also I really depended in terms of the structure of the book, using the surgeon's notes to begin the chapters on a folder that my father gave me just before I was married, and I was 26. And I had no idea this folder existed, but it contained all of the surgeon's notes and invoices and insurance and hospitalization bills and I'll tell you, the surgeon's notes were, and they are in the book, they begin all of the chapters were, just came directly from that folder. So that was pretty extraordinary for me to find.
Actually, Mary Brown asked how easy was it to get the medical records? So that, was it?
Yeah, I didn't even know they existed until my father gave me this folder. And it was, and at the time, and I write about this, I didn't understand why he was giving me this folder at the time he did. I assume it was because he assumed because I was getting married that now I was going to be, that I needed to take, some what's the word I'm looking for? That it needed to be mine now, that I needed to take ownership of this folder. And it also contained photos that were taken of me right after the first surgeries, which were really hard for me to look at. And I still have a hard time looking at them today. And I write about those as well in the book. So, so the process was hard. And I'd also tell you that when I had the first draft and I went down, my dear cousins, Cheryl and David Ball, owned a home on the ocean in Costa Rica at the time. During my last semester, I went down to Costa Rica for a month to finish this, and pretty much sobbed through the whole time of writing and revising and getting it to the place where I felt like it was good enough to be my thesis. So it's been hard. And I still have trouble reading parts of the book because it's emotional. But yeah, so thank you for those questions.
Liz has a couple of questions about the people who hit you. She wanted to know, did any legal thing happen to the people who hit you? And did they have any contact with you or apologize?
Oh, those are great questions. So, and I do write about this in the book. The man who was driving was blind in his left eye. He did not see me because I was on the left side of the street. And so he was devastated. And I have a very, very clear recollection of going to court at some point, probably within the first year, where the insurance companies were trying to settle on a settlement. And the judge asked me to come and sit up in the box next to him and talk to me, asked me if I like school, but I know it was just looking at my face and trying to determine how much a face is worth. I don't know. I suppose that is in the barest terms, probably what he was looking at. But this Mr. Ben, at that time, confronted us in the hallway and asked my parents if he could bring me some baby dolls when I have surgeries, and if I could call him Grandpa Ben. And my parents said yes. So this man who I knew had hit me, I had to call Grandpa Ben, and he brought, for at least, I can't even remember, probably half a dozen of the surgeries after that. He would bring a baby doll to me for each of the surgeries. I hated baby dolls. I was not a doll girl at all. And so, but my parents made me say thank you and made me call him Grandpa Ben for as long as and I don't really remember if he died or if he just kind of fell away from our lives or what, but I don't remember him probably, well, I had most of my surgeries, 12 of the surgeries in the first 4 years. I don't really remember him being part of my life after that 4-year time, because I would have been about 9 by then. Okay. So yeah.
Oh, yeah, intense. Starshine asks, I'm so curious about how you came about all of the details, the color of your shirt, the cookies, the neighbor hosing away the blood, your hands on the handlebars. Can you tell us about piecing together those compelling bits to recreate the scene? How did you do it? And what impact did that exercise have on you?
Whoa, Starshine. Intense questions. Yeah, so piecing together the story, I have very, very vivid memories of being in the hospital and of going into surgery. So all of those scenes just came right out of my very, very vivid memories. And the story of being hit, I had to piece together from, as I mentioned, my family lore, from my sister, from the surgical notes, and those memories of Michigan. I grew up in Muskegon, and just those summer days, that's how they were. So I had to imagine that and I know it was a warm summer day, so I could imagine that that was what was happening. And Mrs. Medema, I have very, very, happy memories of Mrs. Medema. And I many times went up to her apartment and had cookies and tea with her. So, and I don't remember the accident. So I don't know for sure that I had gone up and had tea with her before that, but I imagined that that was what might have happened. And the bicycle, I remember that bicycle really well. I remember that it was red. I remember it had streamers. I remember it had the basket on the front. And the color of the sunsuit that I was wearing, I imagined that, but I had many of those sunsuits that I wore all summer. So, there's some things that I did have to fill in the blanks a little bit.
Okay.
But the surgeries and the hospitalizations and those experiences were very real. They still are very real for me today.
Wow. Thank you. So Eva too, first says, what a wonderful reading, Marcia. So I thought I'd tell you that.
Thank you. Thank you.
And she says, you once asked me many years ago if I thought accidents were random. Now that you've written this to a point where you're happy, what would your answer to that question be?
Wow.
Good question.
I don't remember that, but I'm sure we did talk about it. I actually talk about this in the book because I was struggling with, what's fate? How do things happen? And struggling with my faith and I grew up Catholic and struggling with, does God create accidents, or does God allow accidents to happen, and that kind of thing. And so I talked with my therapist a lot about these kinds of questions. And one of the things he helped me see and come to realization about was that sometimes things just happen. Just, it's just sometimes bad things happen and there's nothing you can do about it. And if there's nothing you can do about it, then you're not at fault for it either. And because I had blamed myself, and I think my mother blamed herself for many, many years, coming to that understanding that no one can control something like that. No one can, there's nothing I could have done to stop it or to make it happen. So, and it becomes kind of this existential freedom. If you realize that no one controls anything that happens to you, then you realize that you don't have any control. And so why not just live your life and realize that things just happen sometimes. So it was mostly helpful for me though, to come to the realization that I was not at fault, that it wasn't my fault. And because my mother had said that to me when I woke up, which I very clearly remember, it had set the seed for guilt for a long, long time.
Wow. I wonder if she meant to do that. I don't,
Yeah, maybe not. I mean, as a mother, we say things without really realizing what kind of impact they might have.
Thank you. Helena, I hope if I say your name wrong, please forgive me. Helena Hill asked, how much did you remember and how much did you have to reconstruct, especially the dialogue?
I do remember, I have a very clear memory of waking up in the hospital after the accident and hearing my mother say that to me. I have very clear memories of her sitting by the hospital bed knitting, just sitting there knitting quietly while I was laying there, often with my hands tied to the bed. I remember very clearly having to undergo bandage changes, which were very painful, and crying and having my surgeon tell me to stop crying. I mean, I have really vivid memories of a lot of those things. So all of those memories, all of those things I wrote about being in the hospital and the experiences I had there and the surgeries, those are all real. Those are just, I remember those very clearly. I had to piece together the accident. And as I mentioned earlier, it was, helpful to have that folder from my dad and the surgeon's notes. And again, just, kind of growing up being told by my parents what had happened to me. so yeah, all of the experiences all through school, the horrible experiences I had with the nuns in Catholic school, being thrown in the dark cloakroom for acting out, being made to kneel in the corner on the wood in the corner of the classroom, having chalk and erasers thrown at me. All of those things I have very clear memories of. And then more happily being able to go to public school for 7th grade and starting to make friends, and realizing that I could have a life outside of real sadness. And I mean, for those first 4 years, I was in and out of the hospital every 3 to 4 months. I was every Christmas vacation, every summer vacation, I was in the hospital again. So yeah, thank you for that question.
So let's see, Jacqueline Delibes.
Oh, hi, Jackie.
And by the way, there are many wonderful comments about the book, and you're reading, and I know that Marcia will get a copy of these questions so that she'll be able to see what you've written to her. It's very wonderful for me to be able to read it. But Jacqueline asks, did the experience of crafting this memoir ultimately help you heal, integrate, or let go of any of the more difficult aspects of the story to any marked degree?
Yes, to a great degree, actually. And one of the things that I've confided with friends that now with this book coming out right now, it's also brought up a lot of stuff for me, more stuff that I thought I had worked through in all those years of therapy. But honestly, yes, the writing of this helped me tremendously to come to terms with and understand things like, why was my mother so cold and distant to me when she was loving with my siblings? Why, why did I feel, and I didn't really feel that until after my dad died. And once my dad died, who I think probably, my dad was the most wonderful person, and he was the reason I probably survived, because he always loved me unconditionally and supported me and took care of me and gave me that sense of security that I needed, because my mother couldn't. But I didn't see that with my mom until after my dad died. And then I started to notice her distance and her coldness, and I couldn't understand for a long time what was going on with her. So I had, so the writing of this helped me figure out a lot of that stuff, and of course with therapy as well. And one of the things I'm really looking at now too is the lingering effects. And I talk about this a little bit in the book, but I think there's more to say about it. But the lingering effects of complex trauma. Complex trauma is trauma that is sustained over a long period of time, and it's often it often affects children who are physically abused, but also emotionally abused. And so and one of the things my therapist said to me one day, we were talking, and he said, well, I think you were abused. And I said, no, I wasn't abused. The surgeries were done for my own good. I always knew that, And he said, it doesn't matter. The physical abuse, the physical things that happened to you could be correctly qualified as abuse. And so some of the things that happened to me, like the out of body experience I had, where I was on the ceiling watching myself in the hospital bed, those are all directly tied to abuse, where your psyche just can't take any more of what you're experiencing, and so you lift out of your body. And I remember very clearly looking at my body in the bed and trying to figure out why I was on the ceiling and what was going on, and some of the long-term effects of traumatic, sustained traumatic events, I have struggled with. And I can tell you there are a number of the children who suffer chronic adverse traumatic events suffer serious social, emotional, physical, neurological, and sensory development problems. So things like uncertainty about the reliability and predictability of the world. That would be one of mine. Problems with boundaries. I've always had trouble setting boundaries with people that I'm in relationship with. social isolation, difficulty with emotional self-regulation, chronic or pervasive depression, suicidal preoccupation. I've never really had those issues, but definitely substance abuse, problems focusing, lack of continuous and predictable sense of self, positive body image, just, feelings of shame and guilt, low self-esteem, all of those things are directly related to complex trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm, really looking at a lot of that right now, and anxious to delve into it more and help bring more awareness to the ways that trauma affects us as adults. And this book is a lot about how, when I got to be in, toward middle age, how I started all of those things I'd learned as survival skills when I was little, started to not serve me very well as an adult. And I made decisions that were based on those things that turned out not to be good decisions. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Okay, thank you. Sarah Sinclair asks,
Sarah.
she said, you talk in the book about your mom and dad and what your traumatic experience was like for them. Have you been able to talk to your siblings about what it was like for them to live through and after your trauma?
Yeah, that's a really good question. My sister Sherry and I have talked quite a bit about this, and I write about this a little bit in the book. She remembers, because she was 10, I was 5, my younger sister was a baby, and my brother was 3. And neither one of them have any recollection about that. Although I know that the whole family was affected by the fact that I was not only seriously disfigured when I was a child, but going through surgeries for the next 15 years. My sister Sherry, I surmise, and we've talked about this. I mean, my mom said to her, "You're going to have to be responsible now for more things in the house." Marcia's, been injured, and so she took on the role kind of as a mini mom, which in some ways denied her some of her childhood, which was really sad to me, and I think to her. And my brother kind of got, lost. I mean, he was really quiet when he was younger, and he struggles with a serious mental illness today, which probably was more related to genetics than anything. But I'm sure the fact that he was, all the attention in the family was on me all the time for all of those years. So he probably felt lost. My little sister, I'm sure, struggled with that too, although she was a baby, so she did get a lot of attention. But yeah, all of those dynamics certainly were at play for all of those years.
Yeah, your accident must have affected everyone in the family, not
Yeah.
you, of course, most traumatically, but still.
Yeah.
Thank you. Tanya Perpinievich asks, how has finishing and publishing the book opened other conversations for you?
Oh, Tanya, that's a great question. It's been a huge relief to me to finally finish this book, and also opened up opportunity for me to start thinking about other things that I want to focus on, because it was like, one of those things that just eats at you until you can finish it. And now that it's out, it's as I mentioned, I'm feeling really emotional about it. I feel more raw about it, because it's out in the world, and it's pretty I'm pretty vulnerable, and I reveal a lot of things in it that were hard for me, but also really necessary for me to be able to come to the place I am today, which is an acknowledgement of what happened to me, and also not just understanding, but acceptance of who I am today. And I'll tell you, one of the things that book did for me too was help me see myself and my face in a different way, because it's always been what I remember seeing when I was little, which was pretty bad. People, I write about one time when I was with my mother downtown and my brother, and we were in the department store, And this woman came around the racks with her kids, and she saw me, and she grabbed her kids and turned their faces away from me and said, "Don't look at that little girl."
Mm.
And I have a very vivid memory of that. So those kind of things, I have, I carried with me through most of my lifetime. And I write about an experience I had when I was reading to some kids in second grade, I think. And when I was the editorial page editor at the News Press, I was in my 30s. And this kid said, "You look like a witch. Look at your eye. What's wrong with your eye?" And I was kind of, by then, people kind of stopped asking after I was in my 20s, and I'd gone along, I had a pretty extraordinary journalism career for me. I loved it. I loved my job. And I met people every day, and I never tried not to think, I stuffed all this stuff down. So that brought up, of course, all that shame and all that humiliation and that fear. And so I've carried all that with me. I would say that finally having it out and published, and being able to see my face the way it looks today has been a big part of this process for me. And I still see it every day in the mirror, but I finally come to understand that I look better than I think I look. So that's helpful.
Yeah, as many women. Leslie Dieneberg.
Hi, Leslie.
Good thing you know who they are. She says, "I know you have worked as an editor, writing coach with many people on some very personal stories. What was it like being on the other side of this equation and getting feedback from your editor?"
Oh, you know what? I can't say enough about my editors. And I'm going to say editors because Lisa and others have all been wonderful readers for me over the years. And Ruth Thompson, who's my editor and publisher, really, we worked on more revisions just over the last year, which I think very much strengthened the book. And this book is probably 75-80% different from the master's thesis that I finished 9 years ago.
Mm.
So it's been a long journey, but I'm very happy. And Ruth was amazing. I don't think they're on the call because she and Don are back in New York. They're probably sleeping, but she was really helpful in pushing me, as was Mac McElvoy, who was my very first editor that I paid to look at the first draft of this book, in saying things like, "Can you go a little deeper here?
Mm-hmm.
What did this mean to you? How did this affect you?" And I'm kind of a spare writer, so I wanted to gloss over all that stuff. I just wanted to tell the story and not tell anybody how it made me feel. And so those people were so helpful in pushing me, as was Lisa and other readers, in pushing me to say, what did this mean?
Mm-hmm.
How did this affect you? How did it change you? And I think I probably could even go deeper into some of these places, but at some point I just had to say, I think I'm done.
This segues into a question that's on my screen here. It's from Janet Lucy.
Hi, Janet.
She has, the question is, how did you know when you had finished writing the story?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I thought I had finished it like 45 or 50 times. You get to the point, and then you have someone read it and they go, "Oh, what about this?" Or, Ruth particularly was really good about saying to me, "Aren't you angry? Aren't you mad at your mother? Why don't you?" She was getting angry with my mother for me. She was like really pushing me to tap into that. And I kept saying, yeah, there's some anger. I was particularly angry with Grandpa Ben. And sometimes I feel angry at my surgeon, because he was a really tough German, surgeon. I mean, he did a lot of things that were painful for me physically.
Mm-hmm.
And also I loved him. He was more like a father figure in some ways than a surgeon, but also was the surgeon. was the authority. And I couldn't say no to him, and I couldn't say no to my parents, and I couldn't say no to the nurses. I had no choice in a lot of that stuff. So that was, that was hard for me. And I also felt such probably more puzzlement around my mother for a long time, that I couldn't get angry because I couldn't understand why she would do the things she did, or why she felt the way she did. And there certainly was guilt. The book also talks about, and I'll just mention this, that she and my dad lost 2 baby boys before I was born, tragically. So she had already lost 2 children at the time, before I was hurt. So I think she just like closed up. She just emotionally could not deal with it, and had to look at my face every single day as a reminder of that tragedy. Right. So, yeah.
Yeah, Linda Stewart Oaten asked, I wonder if you've been able to forgive your mother. So I think,
Yeah, in a lot of ways, because I have a lot of compassion for her. I'm also, I still also struggle with the way she treated me, but I also have an understanding of why now. So, so yeah, in many ways, I have come to terms with that, and I have forgiven her for all of that. And I, honestly have to forgive everybody who was involved with this, including myself. That's been the hardest one.
Interesting. Andromeda had another question, very good question. In learning how to structure and write this memoir, what was most helpful to you? Reading other memoirs about similar subjects, or different ones? Simply writing? Receiving feedback? What taught you the most?
Getting feedback, I would say, from the MFA program that you and I did, Andromeda, to all of the people who have read it over the years and given me feedback. My friend Susan Schiavelli is the one who suggested the braided nature of the first chapter, going back and forth, telling the story from different points of view. That was huge for me. And the using the surgeon's notes to start the chapters was recommended by Brad Kessler, who was one of my workshop leaders in my final semester. And those 2 things were the biggest things that helped me come to some kind of structure. And it's a very, it's, as you all know, because you're all writers, it's an unusual structure. It's a braided structure, but it's also circular, because it comes back in, to those surgeries, goes back in time to those surgeries in each chapter, while moving forward in a braided fashion. So, and that was hard to piece together. And someone asked when I knew it was done. I think when I finally felt like the structure was there and all the pieces were there, then I knew that I had what was done, that it was a completed work.
Okay. I don't know if we have time. I have one more question, another question from Liz, when it's a question that goes back to Grandpa, whatever his name.
Grandpa Ben.
Yeah, who hit you. He said, having to say thank you to someone who hurt you so horribly and traumatically, who gave you things he thought a girl would like, but didn't know you enough to know that wasn't you. How did that impact you as you were growing up?
I've had to think about this a lot, because as a really obedient little girl, who had to do everything everybody told me to do anyway, and my parents, when they said call him Grandpa Ben and take the the baby dolls, I did what I was told. But as I said, I didn't like the dolls, and I never played with them. And maybe that was my way of rejecting his overtures. But as an adult, thinking back on it, I realized that it was just another place where I couldn't say no. And I had no control. And that's one of the things that I today still struggle with is I need to have control. That's where I get into trouble, is if I think I need to have control, then I try to take control with something that I need to probably let go of. But yeah, that's definitely, it laid the groundwork for me, one, not trusting my own feelings, because I was told that I needed to, follow the instructions that I was getting from the nurses, the doctors, my mom and dad, from Grandpa Ben even. Take that baby doll and say thank you, you know. So again, this is one of the things that I've had to learn and understand and try to counteract actually as an adult. That's a good question. Thank you.
As I said, Marcia, you've got a lot of wonderful comments here and that I hope you'll get to read. It's a pleasure to be able to read all these wonderful things people are saying. I've
Thank you.
had the chance to read this book many times, and it's a wonderful thing. And there was one question that I think Mike can answer. It's from Michelle L. Says, will this recording be available? This would be good for trauma writing students.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, it will be available on our YouTube channel, Chaucer's Books YouTube channel. I'll provide a direct link on our event page so they can just click right to it.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for wonderful questions.
Wonderful. I'm glad I got to be a part of it. I, can't go to, the last place I went to before we shut down was Santa Barbara.
That's right. That's right.
I haven't traveled since. So it's great to go.
Lisa and Marcia, thank you very much. It was a wonderful evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and please buy Face a Memoir. It's a really wonderful book. So thank you, and everybody, please have a nice evening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Chaucers.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.